Tom Wilson's in hot water with the Department of Player Safety yet again, except this time it's only a fine. We're going to discuss the situation, and I might have to have a little bit of a rant here why I think they really didn't get this one right, and we also have some signings to discuss today as well. We'll jump into that coming up next. So welcome back to Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have the Tom Wilson situation that I want to discuss here today. There's a lot of different opinions out there. I think for the most part, a lot of people are in agreement here that Wilson is getting a slap on the wrist here. Now, there's obviously, like I said, different opinions out there. I hope you'll respect mine. I will certainly respect yours. Feel free to leave comments. I do personally find it a little challenging to believe that you can actually defend this guy, but I know there's going to be Caps fans that do and will say whatever you want, and it's just sometimes it's whatever. Like, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Let's all just discuss this respectfully here. Now, in my opinion, Department of Player Safety and George Parros got this one wrong, and they did not go anywhere near harsh enough for the actions of Tom Wilson last night against the New York Rangers. And the unfortunate circumstance here is I think a lot of it has to do with how the rule book is worded and how things happen. It's almost like they are not going to punish somebody for their actions because they look more at the result. And fortunately, we didn't see anything worse happen. I guess that's a good way to look at it. So in case you're not familiar with what happened, let's quickly recap here. So obviously there's a big melee in front of the net. Pavel Buchnevich is in the crease. I think Wilson thinks that Buchnevich is kind of kicking at the goalie, Vanacek. But I don't really think he is. He's just a reactionary play, in my opinion. So Buchnevich goes down on the ice, and Wilson is on top of him, punching him in the head. So then his teammates start to defend him. I think Strome was the first one in. And eventually Artemi Panarin jumps on Wilson's back to try to pull him off here and to try to get things settled. But obviously, if you're jumping on Tom Wilson's back, you're not going to settle things. You're going to escalate it worse. And basically, Wilson ended up ragdolling Artemi Panarin. Panarin's helmet comes flying off. And he basically gets body slammed to the ice. You can't really tell too much if his head made ice contact with the ice or if he just barely, but they are so lucky that it was not substantially worse. And I had flashbacks of Todd Bertuzzi, Steve Moore here, when Steve Moore, his career was ended. And Artemi Panarin is a star player, and it really shouldn't matter. I was seeing that argument there a lot too today, saying, Wilson needs to, be careful here. He's dealing with Panarin, a star player. It shouldn't matter if it's Artemi Panarin, Connor McDavid, or a fourth line plug in his first NHL game. We're talking about people's lives and safety here, and there's a reason why the NHL has adapted the rule that if your helmet comes off, you have to get off the ice. It's dangerous. I am sure anybody out there, I don't care how tough you think you might be, you go head first on that ice, you're going to be concussed. You could die from it. I mean, it's only common sense here. Like, if you ever hit your head, trust me, it's not something you want to do. You only have one head. You only have one brain. You have to protect your bucket here because you're not going to be able to replace it. And Artemi Panarin, he went down with such force that if his head would have been the focal point hitting the ice, it could have been a tragedy on the ice. And in my opinion, I almost think that it's going to take something drastic like that to happen for player safety to react properly here. And at the end of the game, the Rangers coach David Quinn said Panarin was okay, but then this morning they've announced that Panarin's out for the season. So we don't know exactly the extent of Panarin's injuries at this point, but they've only got I think 4 or 5 games left. I think it's 4 that the Rangers have to play. So at this point, the way the things are going in the standings, it's not worth Panarin even trying to play if he is hurt. Anyways, a lot of people really thought that Wilson would be suspended, given his long rap sheet that he's dealt with before, that he would at least be out for the rest of the regular season, maybe a few playoff games. It's really difficult to say. They tend to judge these things based on the impact of the game. So playoff games are usually weighted heavier. So one playoff game is usually equivalent to what you'd normally get of 3 regular season games or something like that. And Tom Wilson in this case, even though really Buchnevich I would think is okay, he was fined $5,000 for roughing, and it's basically more for punching Buchnevich in the back of the head when he was down on the ice. And actually, even as he starts to go down on the ice, if you really watch that clip in slow motion, it almost looks like Wilson even tries to drive him into the ice harder and then starts wailing on him. Doesn't get too many licks in before the Rangers teammates jumps on him. And then he ends up tangled up with Artemi Panarin, and just the way he grabbed him by the hair and was manhandling him, Panarin is so lucky that it wasn't worse, and I guess we'll have to wait for further word on the extent of the injuries here. There is a major outrage against Department of Player Safety today, although I would be willing to bet that there's Caps fans that are going to defend this guy. And the other thing that I found made it a little worse, that it was really in bad taste, Washington Capitals Twitter handle last night, I'm not sure who runs it, but whoever's looking after the social media posted a picture here, and I screenshotted it because I figured it would end up getting deleted, and it did. I believe they've taken it down, but it basically has a picture of Tom Wilson saying that he chooses violence and he's living rent-free in people's heads. And again, after what just happened, to post that is an extremely poor taste. I can't believe they did that. I don't know if anybody was in trouble over it or not. I'm sure the league probably wasn't too thrilled with it. But, there's one thing about old-time hockey, but you can be respectful of old-time hockey. You didn't see Bob Probert taking cheap shots, and Wendell Clark and Ty Domi and all these guys, like the old Rock'em Sock'em days where you could lay big hits. Now, the rules on hitting, yes, has changed a little bit. We don't see the type of brawls and fights like we used to, but if two guys are going to go at it and fight, that's completely different. Like, this is not even a situation of Tom Wilson, really fighting anybody. There's nobody on the ice, which is the problem. You could argue is the problem. Nobody on the ice, or even on the Rangers bench for that matter, that could really stand up to this guy. So for those people who advocate that teams really need to have an enforcer type of player, this is one of those situations where it might have come in handy. If somebody was on the ice who could stand up to him, and that maybe Wilson wouldn't be taking these types of liberties. But when he's out there knowing that he's one of the toughest guys in the league and that nobody can touch him, what do you expect him to do? Now, another good comment that I've seen here, actually from former player and current podcaster and member of Barstool Sports, Ryan Whitney, mentioned on Twitter, and he's not wrong, is that you talk to the other 30 or soon to be 31 GMs around the NHL, they'd all love to have Tom Wilson on their team. He's a big guy who has some skill. That's the worst of it. This guy can play hockey. Could he play with an edge and play a very physical style of game, a punishing style of game, but within the guidelines and the rules? I think he can. There's lots of guys that somewhat fit that role, but don't quite have that size and, that intimidation factor that he comes with. And I don't think he can control himself. Like, he seems like he loves violence, which is, somebody is going to get killed out there is my concern. Like, it's going to take something way more drastic for them to react properly. And I think that's why we're only seeing a fine today and not an extended suspension. A lot of people are calling for this guy to be kicked out of the league. Now, I understand the sentiment. I'm not sure I completely agree with that. But, look at, Matt Cook with Pittsburgh. He was running around causing injuries there for a while. And from what I had read before and seen, it looks as though guys like Mario Lemieux and ownership GMs took him aside and said, you have to change. You have to knock off this nonsense. And he eventually did. Now, of course, he lasted in the league a little longer and whatever. The end of his career was a little bit, not so harsh that way. But these guys can play within the rules. Wilson has been suspended already this year for 7 games on Brandon Carlo for that hit. Before that, if you go back a couple of years ago, he had that 20-game suspension for the preseason hit in September. And obviously that was ended up being reduced by 14 after going through arbitration and going to the commissioner. But still, this guy has a long, lengthy rap sheet that really pretty well, and the Capitals don't seem to be anywhere interested or concerned about helping him change to still play that physical style, still be intimidating, but to not be so dangerous and to more within the rules. And it's a problem. I'm concerned for player safety out there, and I don't care what people say. I know there's going to be some people who comment and be like, oh, you're soft, or a bunch of pansies, or this is not the way hockey. You know what? If you stop and think about people's lives, about people's safety first, I would hope you could see where the people that are outraged are coming from. I love a hard physical hockey game. And trust me, I like the rough stuff. I grew up with it. I've played it myself at lower, obviously at much lower levels. But like, this is something that we all are, for the most part, fond of. It's an entertainment factor, but I don't want to see anybody's career be ended or somebody, heaven forbid, be killed on the ice because of stupidity and somebody can't control themselves. So in my opinion here, Department of Player Safety really went too light on this. They're not sending the right message. And I just don't know what else to say, but they should be ashamed of themselves. I don't think they're looking after their players. I'm sure the Rangers are going to be making us think about this as well. I hope Artemi Panarin is okay, and it's really is not that bad, but it looked, watching his head go down, like watch it in slow motion, it's really scary in my opinion. Because if you just think about people as people, not as hockey players for a minute, think about the impact to his life, his quality of life. Like that stuff has to come first. That's just the way it is. And if people can't accept that, I'm not sure what more I can tell you. I'm probably never going to change your opinion. Let me know what your thoughts are on the Tom Wilson situation. Should have the NHL thrown the book at him, given him a suspension? Do you think how many games do you feel would have been fair given his history? Rest of the regular season, should they have thrown in some playoff games? I know there's some people, like I said, that want to ban, and as much as, I understand where they're coming from, I think that's too much. I think we can, hopefully get this guy to adjust his game here. But so I also have some signings I want to talk about here quickly before we go as well. The Tom Wilson situation is kind of dominating the news cycle here so far today, but here's a few signings that I found were interesting that you might want to keep an eye on. For one, the Columbus Blue Jackets have signed 28-year-old Justin Danforth, who was an undrafted player. He played 4 years in the NCAA, never got drafted by the NHL, ended up going 2 years in the minors between the East Coast League and the AHL on minor league contract only, never got a two-way deal in the NHL. Did a couple of years of that, headed over to Europe. He played a couple of years in Liga in Finland, and then he's gone into the KHL this past year. Now, his 3 last years between his time in Liga and the KHL, he's been pretty well like a point per game player. Last year in the KHL, he had 55 points in 58 games, and he's really kind of blossomed as a late bloomer, at least in their level of hockey. Now, the NHL is not the same beast here, but for him to come back to North America and get a shot on a 1-year contract, $750,000 with Columbus, who really desperately needs some extra scoring forwards, hey, I think it's worth giving him a shot, and it could be quite a story for him to make his NHL debut at such a late age after going undrafted. We'll see what he can do, and I'm sure he'll be ready to go come training camp time with CBJ. The Edmonton Oilers have come to terms on an entry-level contract with one of their goalie draft picks out of Russia as well. Ilya Konolov was a 2019 third-round pick, played in the KHL this past season, has now signed his 2-year entry-level contract, given the fact that he's 22 years of age. And the Tampa Bay Lightning have also signed a Russian goalie prospect, Amir Miftakov, who's 21 years old. He was a 6th-round pick this past year in the 2020 entry draft. He played in the KHL this past year for Lokomotiv, also spent time at the lower level VHL as well. Obviously, for both of these prospect Russian goalies, no guarantee that they come to North America this coming season. Obviously, they're under contract, so they're fully signed that way, but they could end up being loaned back to the KHL and remain in Russia for another year or more. It's really difficult to say, but they can possibly get a loan agreement that way, or they could end up in the North American system. Just depends on where the team feels is best for them to continue developing. So those are your signings for today. Of course, we have the Tom Wilson situation I want you to comment on down below, and we'll discuss that further as this situation evolves here. So if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any featured content. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news from around the entire NHL. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.